They say in small towns the past never dies. It only waits patiently beneath the roots of maple trees and the paint of old houses until someone digs too deep. In the winter of 1979, 2 boys went missing from the Dalton family farm, just outside of Franklin, Missouri. The Daltons were a quiet family, church-going, respected, the kind that waved to every car that passed their dusty driveway. When the snow thawed in March, the boys were found, but what they uncovered wasn't just the bodies. It was something older, something that didn't want to be remembered. You can still find newspaper clippings if you know where to look. The headlines are small, buried under ads for used cars and seed sales. 2 children found on Dalton property. That's it. No follow-up, no trial, no arrests. Just a week later, the Dalton house was burned to its foundations. Local police said it was an accident, faulty wiring. But ask anyone who lived there then, and they'll tell you the same thing. No one saw smoke, no one heard the fire trucks. The house was gone overnight. Hello everyone, before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. The Dalton family disappeared too. Mother, father, and their only surviving daughter Leela. Some say they moved west. Others swear they still see Leela walking near the creek at dusk, her dress still ash-stained, her hair still wet. When I first found the Dalton file, locked in a county archive mislabeled as Property Tax Dispute 1979, I thought it was just another rural tragedy. But tucked between the brittle police reports and faded photos was a single note, handwritten in a careful, almost childlike script. We did what the land asked us to do. That line has haunted me ever since. Because Franklin, Missouri isn't on any modern map. The coordinates lead to a clearing in the woods, nothing more. And yet, the deeper you dig, the more you find. Records erased, census forms missing, a town that seems to have deliberately buried itself. Who were the Daltons really? And what did they uncover that winter? The answers didn't come from the town's history books. They came from the ground. The same ground that swallowed their children. When I went to Franklin, or what's left of it, I didn't expect to find much. The highway veers away from that part of Missouri now, leaving only cracked roads that end in corn stubble and silence. No signs, no markers. But locals still talk if you ask the right questions. An old man at a gas station outside Lebanon told me he remembered the Daltons. Nice people, he said, kept to themselves. But there was something wrong with that land. He pointed at a patch of forest on an old paper map, the kind folded and refolded so many times it looked like it might tear under its own history. They built on top of it, he whispered, and the land never forgot. The Dalton farm had once been part of a settlement dating back to 1836, land granted to a group of families escaping a cholera outbreak further east. But those settlers vanished within a decade. No graves, no parish records. Just gone. In 1880, Weir described the property as unsuitable for habitation, noting strange sinkholes and noise like wind when there was none. Then, almost a century later, the Daltons moved in. Leela Dalton would have been 8 when her brothers went missing. There's a single photograph of her in the case file, a school portrait. She's smiling, but her eyes are strangely distant, unfocused, like she's listening to something behind the camera. When the boys' bodies were found, Leela was the one who led the sheriff to them. She said she heard them calling from the trees. The coroner's report, though partially water-damaged, mentions an anomaly. Both boys were found lying face up, hands crossed on their chests, no sign of struggle, no trauma. But the ground beneath them was different, blackened, as if burned from beneath the soil. The sheriff's notes mention a chemical residue, though the lab never identified it. After the funeral, the Dalton parents refused interviews. They stopped attending church. Neighbors reported hearing hymns coming from the fields late at night, long after the family should have been asleep, and then a month later the fire. But the fire wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of what Franklin tried so hard to forget. Because when the ashes cooled, the foundation of the Dalton home revealed something no one could explain, something that wasn't built by human hands. When investigators returned to the Dalton property after the fire, they found no sign of accelerants, no human remains, and no trace of the family. But the basement, somehow untouched by the flames, revealed what the sheriff later called a structure of unknown purpose. The original report described it as a circular chamber carved directly into the limestone, lined with animal bones pressed into the walls like decorative tiles. The smell, they said, was not of smoke, but of damp soil and iron. Photographs from the scene are grainy, but one detail stands out: symbols etched into the stone, spirals and intersecting lines forming patterns that didn't match any known religious or cultural reference. One deputy, interviewed years later, claimed that when he stepped into the circle, he could hear something moving under his boots, like air escaping from the ground. He quit the force a week after, moved to Illinois, and refused to speak of it again. In the months that followed, state investigators quietly closed the case. Structural collapse, they said. Accidental fire. But a Freedom of Information request decades later revealed something chilling. The basement wasn't part of the Dalton home's original blueprints. No contractor in the county ever filed permits for excavation, and yet the structure had been there long before the house was built. A geological survey dated the chamber's stonework to the late 1800s, around the time the original settlers vanished. By 1980, Franklin's remaining population had dwindled to a few dozen. Farms failed, wells went dry, and what little industry remained packed up and left. By 1983, the post office was closed, the roads overgrown, and Franklin was erased from the state registry. Still, a few former residents recall the night the Daltons' house burned. They say the sky glowed orange without smoke, and a low hum carried across the fields, like distant thunder that never stopped. One woman, a nurse at the nearest hospital, told a reporter that a girl matching Leila Dalton's description was admitted under a false name the next morning, barefoot and silent. When asked what happened, she whispered, "It wasn't a fire. It was the ground breathing." That girl disappeared from the hospital later that night. No record, no discharge form, no witnesses. Only a single note left on her bed, written in the same careful hand as before: "The land keeps what it's given." Years passed, and the Dalton tragedy became a ghost story, the kind teenagers told near bonfires when the night felt too quiet. But in 1996, a construction crew widening Route 51 unearthed something that brought Franklin's name back into the news for one brief, suffocating week. Beneath what used to be the Dalton property, they found another chamber, not identical but similar in shape and size. Same limestone, same spiral carvings, and a single object resting at its center. A wooden cradle. The cradle was burned black, its edges eaten away by time, but inside were fragments of bone no larger than a child's hand. The remains were tested at a private lab in St. Louis and matched human DNA. But the age was impossible. Carbon dating placed them at nearly 150 years old. The county shut the site down within 48 hours. The construction project was rerouted, the crew reassigned, and the story vanished from every major outlet overnight. Only one local paper ran the headline before the issue was pulled from circulation: "Children beneath the Dalton farm." When I tracked down the former editor of that paper, she refused to go on record. But before hanging up, she said something that stayed with me. It wasn't the Daltons they found. It was what the Daltons found. It through interviews, fragments of church records, and one particularly disturbing diary recovered from a nearby farmhouse. A pattern began to emerge. Each family that had lived on that land since the 1800s had reported the same phenomena. Voices in the cornfields, dead livestock arranged in geometric shapes, and dreams of children standing at the edge of their beds whispering, "Help us go home." The dreams always stopped the night before someone in the family went missing. No one stayed longer than a generation. No one ever left unscarred. The diary's final entry, dated 1891, was written by a woman named Eliza Moore, the last surviving member of the original settlers. Her handwriting trembles, each word carved into the page like she wanted to make sure the earth itself could read it. "The land needs names. It takes the young first. The rest follow. We thought it wanted blood. We were wrong. It wants memory. And maybe that's why Franklin vanished, because the fewer people remembered, the safer the world was. But memory has a way of digging itself back up. By the early 2000s, Franklin existed only as rumor and coordinates. One of those places urban explorers whispered about but rarely reached. Still, curiosity is a dangerous inheritance. In 2003, a small group of college students from Columbia, Missouri, followed old survey maps and posted their journey online. 3 of them returned. The fourth, a history major named Daniel Kerr, was last seen descending into a shallow depression where the Dalton farmhouse once stood. His friend's camcorder footage was later recovered from a storm drain 12 miles away. The recording lasts just under 6 minutes. Most of it is static and wind. But around the 4-minute mark, a faint voice cuts through, high, tremulous, repeating a phrase over and over, "Don't let them forget." The sound isn't Daniel's, it's a child's voice. Authorities dismissed it as a hoax, though the missing persons report remains open. What they didn't release publicly, however, was the digital timestamp metadata embedded in the tape. It showed the audio segment was recorded not in 2003, but in 1979. I've listened to that tape more times than I can count, and every time the same realization hits me. Whatever happened in Franklin, it didn't end with the Daltons. It simply changed form. The ground doesn't stop hungering just because we build roads over it. There are accounts, quietly filed, never followed up, of farmers in neighboring counties finding small handprints in the mud after heavy rain. Others speak of a low vibration at night, like a heartbeat under the fields. The local power company blames aging transformers. But one technician I interviewed told me off record that when the lights flicker, their meters spike, like something beneath the soil is drawing energy, pulsing every few seconds, feeding. If you're still watching, I'd tell the audience, you're already braver than most. Because few people can sit with the truth this long without feeling it under their own skin. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done if this was your bloodline? Would you have left, or would you have stayed to see what the land was asking for? Because the Daltons stayed. And their silence wasn't madness, it was obedience. And obedience, in Franklin, meant survival. But the last surviving Dalton, if she truly lived past that fire, didn't stay silent forever. She spoke once, and the world was never supposed to hear what she said. In 2014, a woman named Lila Mae Dorsey was admitted to a private care facility outside Topeka, Kansas. No relatives, no birth records, just a name on a driver's license so worn it barely registered. She was 73, frail, and claimed to have once lived where the fields breathe. It took months for anyone to connect her to the missing Dalton girl from 1979. When a nurse asked her about the fire, she said quietly, "It wasn't fire, it was waking." A social worker, curious about her story, began taping their conversations. Most were fragmented, memories blurring together like a fever dream. But one tape, labeled Session 5, changes tone completely. Her voice drops, slow and deliberate. She says she remembers the night her brothers disappeared. They weren't taken, they were chosen. Mama said the land needed to remember itself, so we dug where it hummed. We laid them down so it would sleep again. Then, after a long silence, she adds, "But it never sleeps long." The tapes were turned over to the State Historical Society in 2018, sealed and marked confidential. But I managed to hear a copy just once before the archive quietly revoked my access. On the recording, at the very end, after Lila stops speaking, there's a sound faint, rhythmic, like something shifting stones in the dark. It doesn't come from the room. It comes from beneath her voice. Lila died in her sleep 2 weeks later. No cause listed, just heart failure. Her body was cremated, and her ashes requested to be scattered on the soil where the house once stood. But when the courier arrived at the Franklin site, the coordinates led to nothing. The clearing had changed again. The old creek bed was gone. Even the trees looked younger, as if the land had started over. When I went there myself, years later, I brought a recorder. I stayed until dusk. And I swear, just as the last light sank behind the ridge, I heard it, children laughing. Faint, distant, like echoes carried through dirt, and then, beneath that sound, a whisper that froze me completely. It said, "We remember now. There's a reason no one speaks of Franklin anymore. It's not forgotten, it's forgiven. And sometimes forgiveness costs more than sin ever did. Because the Daltons weren't victims. They were caretakers. And the land still keeps what it's given." I used to think stories like this belonged to the past, buried beneath history and superstition, left to rot with the small towns that carried them. But Franklin changed that for me. Because what I found last year shouldn't exist, and yet it does. I was granted limited access to a regional records vault in Jefferson City, mostly agricultural archives from defunct Missouri counties. In one mislabeled box, wrapped in parchment and sealed with wax, was a ledger titled Custodians of the Soil, 1836-1979. Inside, names were listed in a single, unbroken line. Moore, Jensen, Forgotten, each accompanied by the same three words written in identical ink: entrusted, returned, remembered. The last entry was dated December 14, the day after the Dalton house burned. But beneath that line, written in a trembling modern hand, was an addition dated May 3, 2024. One word: Dorsey. Someone, decades after Franklin's erasure, still keeps the ledger alive, still records the names, still tends to the land's memory. I reached out to the Historical Society, the sheriff's office, anyone who might have context. Most ignored me, but one anonymous email arrived a week later. No greeting, no signature, just a message: stop asking. The land knows who listens. Since then, I've heard the hum once, low, distant, vibrating through the floorboards of my apartment. I told myself it was a passing truck, a failing pipe, but then I noticed something impossible. My houseplants had turned their leaves toward the ground. I haven't been back to Franklin, not yet, but I dream of it. The trees, the ash, the quiet pulse of earth like a second heartbeat. And sometimes I see a little girl standing at the tree line watching me, hair matted with soot, eyes like polished stone. She doesn't speak, but I understand her. The land doesn't need believers, it just needs witnesses. And if you've listened this far, if you followed the Dalton story to the very end, then maybe it's already found another. Don't dig there. Don't look for Franklin. Don't remember it when you wake. Because remembering is what feeds it, and once you speak its name out loud, it knows where you are.